as soon as we heard, Lee's coming to Chicago, we got to do something. So this is really exciting.
Well, with the day job, the only way that I can do a book tour is to be like, oh, I'm going to be in Chicago for work. I'll stay an extra day. So, thank you so much.
So Lee Wind is the founding blogger and publisher of I'm Here, I'm Queer, What the Hell Do I Read? An award-winning website about books, culture, and empowerment for LGBTQ youth, allies, and actually for librarians and all kinds of people use this as an amazing resource. And he started that 10 years ago?
No, 11 and a half.
11 and a half years ago. And
but who's counting?
So grateful for it. And there's 2.6 million page views?
Yeah, we just passed 2.6 million.
Yeah. The industry would be at a loss without it, so we're really grateful to him for that. In his Clark Kent jobs, Lee is the Director of Marketing and Programming at the Independent Book Publishers Association and official blogger for SCBWI, Society of Children Book Writers and Illustrators. His superhero job is writing, inspired by a world's amazing and untold LGBTQ history. Lee lives in Los Angeles with his husband and their teenage daughter. Queer as a $5 Bill is his debut novel. And we get to talk about the novel, we get to talk about his blog, we get to talk about the Book Publishers Association, where he was just at a conference. Some of you may have been there. So we're really excited about that. So thank you for coming and hearing about Lee and his book. So Lee, can I first say that I wish this book had existed when I was a young adult. I mean, it would have made all the difference in the world. And thank you for writing it. While I was reading this and preparing for this, I was also in an online conversation about being a marginalized reader who kind of stumbles upon something and says, oh, that's the phrase I've needed. I've had the experience, but nobody has ever put it into language in that way. And a writer friend of mine, Kat Tanaka-Kopnick, described it as a moment of heart-leaping recognition when one is seen and affirmed. And this is how I felt so many times while reading this novel. The most significant one is Lincoln's letter to Fry. So Lee, can you talk about that letter, how you first discovered it, and then what happened next?
Sure. So thanks. First of all, thank you all for being here. Like, what a great turnout. I'm really excited. So in 2011, all right, so I'm gay. Put that out there. I didn't come out fully until I was 25. But I knew at 11. So you do the math, that's 14 years of me hiding, actively hiding, constantly hiding, pretending to be somebody else, to make my parents happy, to make society happy. And in high school and in college and in grad school, I dated girls. And throughout, I just kept on thinking, okay, well, I don't really feel it. I know what I'm supposed to feel, and I don't feel that. But maybe it'll come. Maybe the feelings will come, because I judge. I know that it's the thing I'm supposed to do. So I finally come out, and I meet my husband at age when I was 30, and we've been together 21 years, so do the math, I'm 52. And I went in 2011 to like okay, so when you're not an authentic teenager, you kind of look for these experiences like, how can I reclaim a bit of my teenagerhood? And so there was like a camp, like a weekend summer camp for gay men. And I was like, well, okay. So I went, and it was like swimming and archery. I mean, but they also had like some classes, and one of them was a talk. And it was this guy, Randy Harrison, not the actor from Queer as Folk, somebody else. And he was talking about the letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote Joshua Fry Speed, letters that convinced him and a bunch of other people that Abraham was in love with Joshua. And I was like, that cannot be true. That is like a bridge too far. Like, I just don't believe it. But I couldn't get it out of my mind, like Abraham Lincoln? So I went to the library, and when I got home, I went online and I looked up, like, you know, Joshua Fry Speed, Abraham Lincoln, like what? There was this one book in the library, and it had the letters in it. And when I learned history in school, it was always really boring. It was like dates and names and lots of memorization and no good stories and never a reflection of who I was. So But in this one letter, Abraham and Joshua had lived together for 4 years, and then Abraham moves back to Kentucky and marries a woman named Fanny. And Abraham writes him a letter and says, but now I'm going to get to the point of what I want to say, blah, blah, blah. Are you now in feeling as well as judgment are you now in feeling as well as judgment glad that you're married as you are? From anybody but me, this would be an impudent question not to be tolerated, but I know you'll tolerate it. From me, please tell me quickly. I feel very impatient to know. I got goosebumps because that was exactly how I felt. Exactly. I judged it, but I didn't feel it. Would the feeling come? And we don't have the answer. History is not held on to that answer, but we do know it was only 4 weeks later that Abraham married Mary Todd. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think Abraham Lincoln was in love with another guy. And I kept reading and I did lots and lots more research and I just could not get past that moment, that goosebump moment. And I was like, if I had a time machine and could go back and tell my 15-year-old self that the guy on Mount Rushmore, right, the guy that got us through the Civil War, that helped end slavery, like the father of the Republican Party, although we don't want to claim it right now. Like Abraham Lincoln on the penny on the $5 bill was in love with another guy, it would have completely changed my entire life. I think that had I known, had I had any example, it would have changed it. But I don't have a time machine. So I thought, but I'm a writer, I'm going to pay it forward. So I wrote 2 books. I wrote this fiction book, and I wrote a nonfiction book. The nonfiction book was Lincoln and Speed were 1 chapter out of 15. It's stories about men who loved men and women who loved women and people who lived outside gender boundaries. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the fiction book, I want to read just a little bit of it. Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
So in the story, Wyatt's assigned a book report, and he lives in Lincolnville, Oregon. And everybody has to do, in 9th grade, has to do a book report on Abraham Lincoln. So they go to the library, and the librarian kind of gives him a special book that he has under the counter. And it is the exact same book that I got out of the library in 2011. At 10 o'clock, when he figured the movie would have been over anyway, Wyatt pulled the top comforter up over his feet and grabbed the stupid Lincoln book. It was thin, 70 pages. He loved Mr. Clifton. Not like that, just cool. At least it wouldn't take all night. He opened the cover. It was a bit crumbly at the spine. How old was this thing? The full title read, Joshua Fry Speed, Lincoln's Most Intimate Friend by Robert L. Kincaid. The copyright page said 1943. Well, I figured back then intimate just meant close, best friends. Maybe today it would be Joshua Fry Speed, Lincoln's BFF. Maybe that's what he'd call his blog. He opened the book at random, page 55. It was a letter signed, Yours Forever, Lincoln. Sounded like a love letter, like it should be in Mackenzie's book, Love Letters Between Abe and Mary, with seances thrown in to keep it interesting. It was weird that Abe had signed it Lincoln. Wyatt scanned back to the top of page 54 where the letter began. Springfield, October 5, 1842. Dear Speed. It was a letter to Joshua Fry Speed. Did everyone write like this back then? Why was Abe calling him by his last name? It was like they were in PE together or something. Wyatt started to read the letter. Joshua had been married 8 months. Sounded like Abe had to talk him into it. And then Abe asked, but I want to ask a closer question. Are you now in feeling, as well as judgment, glad that you're married as you are? From anybody but me, this would be an impudent question not to be tolerated, but I know you will pardon it in me. Please answer it quickly, as I feel impatient to know. Wyatt reasoned it through. So, Joshua got married because he judged he should, not because he felt it. And Abe wanted to know if the feeling came later. When was this? He fished a piece of paper out of his jeans pocket and uncrumpled it to mark the page. It was Mackenzie's note, the M and W for their names, inside a heart. He ran downstairs to grab a fresh President Abraham Lincoln timeline. Back in his room, the stiff, coffee-stained paper crackled as he unfolded it, and he searched for the year. 1842, reconciles with Mary Todd, marries her on November 4. This letter was before that wedding, just a month before. Please answer it quickly, as I feel impatient to know. Abe was asking his BFF, are you now in feeling, as well as judgment, glad that you're married as you are? Maybe Abe wasn't sure if he should get married either. Joshua hadn't been. Wyatt stared at the heart note from Mackenzie. Goosebumps broke out along his upper back and arms. Whoa. He and Mackenzie weren't married, but that was how he felt. He judged. It kind of made sense to be her boyfriend, but he didn't feel it. Not the way he was supposed to. But the goosebumps traveled all the way along his spine, down his legs. The hair on his scalp stood up. Was their reason for not feeling it the same as his? It wasn't possible, was it? He turned the pages backward. This section was all letters, almost all of them from Abe to Joshua. He checked out how they ended. Ever yours, as ever, yours forever, as ever, your friend, yours forever. Who was this guy, Joshua? Wyatt flipped to the beginning. He ran a store. A tall, angular young man with lean, wrinkled cheeks and sad gray eyes walked into a general store in Springfield, Illinois more than a century ago and laid on the counter a pair of saddlebags which he carried in the crook of his long arm. He asked the young proprietor of the store the price of a mattress, blankets, sheets, coverlid, and a pillow for a single bed. The items came to $17. It is perhaps cheap enough, the young man with the saddlebag said, but small as it is, I'm unable to pay it. If you'll credit me until Christmas, I will pay you then, if I do well, but if I do not, I may never be able to pay you. The proprietor looked up into the face of his prospective customer and was moved by the forlorn expression in his eyes. He said, "You seem to be so much pained at contracting so small a debt. I think I can suggest a plan by which you can avoid the debt, and at the same time attain your end. I have a large room with a double bed, which you're welcome to share with me." "Where is your room?" "Upstairs," the proprietor replied, pointing to a pair of winding stairs which led from the store to the room. The tall young man picked up his saddlebags, went upstairs, set them down on the floor, returned below with a beaming countenance, and exclaimed jovially, "Well, Speed, I'm moved." That sounded weird. They didn't know each other, but Joshua offered to share his bed with him? And that was pretty intimate. This episode is familiar to all students of the life of Abraham Lincoln. The date of its occurrence, April 15, 1837, marked the transition of Lincoln into a career which led to immortality. Wyatt kept reading. Turned out, Lincoln was really successful in Springfield, but long after he could afford his own bed, he still shared that bed with Joshua. They shared it for 4 years. The bed! Quickly, Wyatt thumbed back through the pages, scanning for the facts. 1837, Springfield, Illinois, a double bed. He raced out of his room to the stairs, nearly colliding with his dad, who was coming out of the laundry room with a basket of folded kitchen towels and napkins. His dad put a finger to his lips, signaling there were guests in room 6. "Where are you going?" he whispered. "Homework." Wyatt held up the book. "Seems like there's more to it than you thought. Good thing we didn't watch the movie." "Yeah, I guess you and Mom were right." Wyatt kept his head down. There was no way they could know he'd just started. "Well, do your best and don't stay up too late." Wyatt nodded to get away and hustled one flight down, trying not to be too loud or too excited. He opened the door to the Lincoln room and hit the switch on the electric poising as oil lamp. Orange-yellow light flickered across the rocking chair, the dresser, the sheets. Suddenly, in his mind, Wyatt saw a second pillow by the first. He blinked it away. Abe hadn't bought one, so maybe they shared the pillow too? He knew the dates, but had to check anyway. The small bronze plaque on its wooden stand in front of the bed announced, "Lincoln slept here, 1837 to 1841. It was theirs. The bed Joshua and Abe shared, it was their bed. In judgment, but not in feeling. Was it code? Could Abe and Joshua have been gay? Wyatt's legs gave way, and then he was sitting on the floor, heart pounding. He opened the book and read like his life depended on it.
Since you ended that with the bed, it seems a good place for this other question. I see so many parallels between the characters in your novel, speaking out, and your process of getting this book published. Fear and courage, truth and lies, the power of community. You truly had a wild ride to publishing this book. What are some of the challenges you faced and innovative ways you carved out new routes?
Whew, so many challenges. Okay, so I did 2 books, the fiction book, this book, and which went through 8 drafts, and a nonfiction book that I told you about. That was called The Queer History Project. 5 years ago, that book sold to one of the big 5 publishers. And I was so excited. It was going to be my debut book. It was with a brand name publisher. You all have heard of them. I'm not going to say their name. But I was so excited. It was so amazing. It finally was happening. I'd worked so hard and for so long. I worked with the editor for a year and a half. We got the manuscript down. They were designing the cover. I was seeing cover designs. It was off at the copy editor. And then our current president was elected. 2 weeks after Trump was elected president, I get a phone call that they absolutely cannot publish the book. They wouldn't go on record as to why, but they were freaked out. They lost courage. They absolutely couldn't be the publishers I needed. I was given a choice. I could take out the chapter on Abraham and Joshua. I could take out the chapter on Eleanor Roosevelt and Lorena Hickok. I could take out the chapter on Mahatma Gandhi and the guy he loved, Herman Kallenbach. And then maybe, possibly, at some future date, maybe they would publish it, but no promises. Or I could get the rights back. And I said, I would like the rights back. I said some other things too, but that was... But on that phone call, I was like, I'd like the rights back. So I had an agent at the time, and she was outraged, I thought, as I was, and the novel had been on submission for a while. So she said, no worries, this is so strong, I'll sell it in 3 weeks. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. After 8 months, not a single bite. The novel at that point had been out on submission for a year. And I was like, I am being preemptively banned by this industry. This is clearly the idea that this icon of American history was gay is too much for corporate publishing to handle. Even indies won't touch it. I mean, 20 editors, only 3 ever bothered to say no. And I was like, but you know what, I have a blog. And a lot of people come to my blog. I get 20 to 25,000 page loads a month on my blog. I was like, and then I had started working at the Independent Book Publishers Association, and I'm like, you know, people publish books themselves. But to publish a book yourself, and in fact, one of the things we say at IBPA is that, in my job there, is that self-publishing is not a great expression because it tricks people into thinking, oh, I can publish this by myself. I can do it all myself. I can design the cover myself. I can edit it myself. I can proofread it myself. I can copy edit it myself. No, you can't. If no one's going to pay me to design the cover of their book, I have no business designing the cover of my book. And you need to hire the professionals to do the stuff that you can't do at a professional level. And there was so much I can't do at a professional level. I'm good with words. But I don't know how to design. I don't know. I can't even edit. I can't even find the errors in my own resume, okay? Like, how am I going to presume to edit my own book? No. I mean, like, I wanted it to be, the goal is that my book and a book from a major 5 publisher are indistinguishable in quality, right? Like, that's the goal. And I achieved that. I'm proud. I really feel like I achieved that. So, so I did a Kickstarter because it was a lot of money, and I just don't have that kind of money sitting in my back pocket. So, but I thought, I didn't like the idea.
I forgot a step.
What?
I forgot a step. The cereal.
Oh yeah. So on my blog, I decided, well, okay, so which book should I push first? What should I do first? And I thought, well, the novel is like a page turner. So let me serialize it on my blog. So I released 1 chapter every Friday for 32 weeks. There are 33 chapters, but the first week I did chapters 1 and 2, kind of get you to the hook. There's a twist in the end of chapter 2. So, thank you. So, the idea was I didn't want it to just be, help Lee raise money for Lee's book because Lee wants to be published. The point of this book is that it's like, yeah, it's a really cool page-turning novel, but it's also this empowerment tool, right? It's this thing that lets people know that they're not alone. And we teach that history is this facade of, like, you know, it's the story of rich, white, straight, cisgendered, able-bodied men from Europe. And that's what we teach. But history is the story of disabled people and people of color and women. And it's the story of men who love men and women who love women and people who lived outside gender boundaries too. And the story of Abraham and Joshua kind of is a crack in that facade. And it lets people know, wait a minute, I am not being told the truth. I'm not being told the full truth here. So I decided, let me choose a big, impressive number, and we'll make the Kickstarter not just helping me print. So altogether, it was 910 copies that we raised today. And I printed up ARCs, I paid everybody to do their amazing work, and so I got it really good, and I got a company to print them and figured out how it would be wholesale, available on a wholesale level to libraries and everybody else. And then it was coming out on October 2nd of last year. And in August, it was revealed that there was an agent that had lied about everything and submitting books about book offers, and it turned out it was my agent. So while the deal at the Big Five publisher was real, and I had a check from them, and I interacted with the editor, something happened, and in between when that deal happened and when she created her own agency, and ultimately she just lied about so much. I had three book deals that she told me were pending that were completely made up. And the book that I self-published or author-published, because I thought that I was being preemptively banned by this industry, no one had seen it. So even the no's were lies. So that was bittersweet, but the die had been, the train had left the station. The book was coming out in October. I had committed to giving away 910 copies, and I had 182 backers in my Kickstarter. So over 1,000 copies were already spoken for. It was already in pre-orders. You ordered it. It was all, like, there was no stopping it. I was like, okay, the universe has conspired. I am self-publishing this book. And then the book started to get really good reviews, and it won the Publishers Weekly, it was a semi-finalist for the Publishers Weekly Book Life Prize, which basically made it one of the top 5 independently published books for middle grade and YA of 2018. And it was in September, it was an indie success story in Publishers Weekly. They did a 2-page profile on me in the book, which was really exciting. And it continues to get really good reviews, and now I'm hearing from readers, so it was a ridiculously crazy journey. I do have a real agent now that's not a criminal. And while I don't have a signed contract, there is a deal in the works for the nonfiction. It has found another home. So more on that as it is available. Wait, if you want to know more, get on my email list. You'll find out. But yeah, so it has been a crazy, crazy journey.
Talk about resilience, talk about persistence, talk about creative ways of thinking about, how to publish. I have a blog, lots of people look at it. Why don't I just put it out there? And then, really want it in print. I want people to hold it in their hands. How do I do that? Kickstarter, and the thing I love about Kickstarter that I was seeing a parallel with the story in the book is that it's harnessing the power of community.
Very much.
That's one of the things, like when we're marginalized writers and marginalized readers, that's like our little secret weapon, is that because when we're marginalized, we create these really strong communities. And so when somebody's, we think we can't get it published, tap into that, in whatever way you can, because it's pretty amazing. And that happens if you haven't read the novel yet. I won't spoil it, but there's a little bit of community energy going on there too. So it's
a lot about it's a lot about allyship, right? Like I always say, I'm the G of LGBTQ, but that means I have to be an ally to all those other letters. But it also means I have to be an ally to women, and I have to be an ally to people of color, and I have to be an ally to disabled people. I want to be an ally to everybody, and not in a selfish way. But the beauty of that is that then they become allies to me. Bayard Rustin was the gay African-American that actually planned the March on Washington, where Martin Luther King did the I Have a Dream speech, there's a little subplot about that. And he said that we will not win equality for gay people by fighting for gay rights. We will win equality for gay people by fighting for the rights of everyone. And I think that's really true.
So that actually then takes me to, Lee was interviewed for a podcast called One Bad Mother, which is pretty funny. And he talked about going to events at school with his teenage daughter. You were talking about like going to other, you also were the lead for the...
Yeah, I'm the parent affinity group representative for the LGBTQ, well, they call it Pride Project in the high school, and it's called the GSA in the middle school.
That.
And so there's actually a group of parents that are affinity group, or parents and guardians that are affinity group sort of representatives, because the school has a bunch of different affinity groups. And what we realized about 4 years ago, actually it was somebody else, this amazing guy from El Nido, which is the Spanish word for the nest. And they had created a group to support the Latino Student Alliance. And this amazing gentleman showed up at the Pride Project family and friends potluck. And I was like, hey, it's so great, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, I want to support you. And that was like the thing that clicked. And then we started going to their event and to the Black Student Alliance event and like showing up at the special graduation ceremony for the Asian students, and like we all started to go to each other's things. And it's not like a utopia, but it is the road to utopia, because that's really cool when we all stand up for each other and we all recognize that, like, hey, you know what, let's do this together, because there's power in that.
And in that interview you talked about creating community across like the boundaries that we've created. Like the idea that these boundaries are not fixed, that we think of them that way, and so then how can we make them more permeable? So did your experience with that happen before you wrote the part of the book that's all about kind of communities coming together? Or
it really influenced it,
yeah.
Especially the ending. I mean, not to spoil things, but yeah, well, I mean, Martin Luther King said it in that vision, you know, that like, you know, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, and one of the things that the main character in this says, and gays, everybody, and that expansive vision. I think that it does, I mean, I can't take credit for that expansive vision, but like, yeah, tapping into that, doing that personally made that feel so much more real.
Let me go back now. Oh, so I don't know if you all know this, but the history of like fiction for queer characters, we tend to get killed off or we're the villain. So I'm just really grateful to Lee for making characters that are not the villain, and creating plots that don't involve one of us, you know, somebody dying somewhere. I mean, it's still happening on TV. We're like watching TV, there's a lesbian character and they're like romance and they're in love, and it's so, one of them's killed off. Seriously, today. So, you know, the thing that I thought was so fabulous is this is a book that has queer characters, but you're not going those typical routes, thank goodness. And you find really interesting ways to work with plot. Like there's just this winding and twisting. So we've got a room full of writers here. Can you talk about a little bit about plot and how you develop plot?
Yeah, thank you. Plot, I think like, I don't know, I know that there's some writers that start with setting, and some writers start with character. A lot of writers start with character. I'm not jealous of them, but I'm a little wistful. And then some writers, plot is what comes to them more easily. And to me, plot, like, I'm a problem solver. Like, if you tell me a problem, my brain is going to start spinning on, all right, what are possible solutions? And I do that all the time with plot. And then, but the challenge with this book was, okay, it's about letters that Abraham Lincoln wrote in 1842. How is that possibly relevant to a teenager today? So I needed to figure out, how could I stack the deck so I had a main character for whom it was important? So his parents own the Lincoln Slept Here bed and breakfast. They live in a town called Lincolnville, Oregon, where the streets are the names of all the presidents in alphabetical order all the way through the second Bush. I love that second Bush thing, too. Because could you imagine, I'll meet you at the corner of Bush and second, wait, which Bush? Right? Like, that would be so fun. So like creating, and I knew I wanted the idea that he would be this kid that finds this out and thinks, you know what? Everybody loves Abraham Lincoln. If I tell the world that Abraham Lincoln was in love with another guy, it'll change how everyone feels about gay people, and like cue the rainbows and the happy ending and the singing birds. I am there and I can come out and everything will be grand and glorious. And that's totally what I imagined that he would do. But in real life, if you went really viral with the news that Abraham Lincoln was in love with Joshua Fry Speed, I do not believe you would be cueing the rainbows quite so soon. I think that there would be a huge media firestorm and conservative backlash. And that is what I wanted to depict. And then I was like, okay, well, what does he do? How does he make his way through that? And I was like, okay, well, what are the things that I stack to make it important? I was like, they're going to lose the family business, right? There's so much backlash. The town's economy is purely tourism, and now they've destroyed the entire, not just their own business, they've destroyed the entire town's economy. They're being sued. Like, I just kept on thinking, how can I ratchet it up? How can I make it more and more difficult? That's our job, right? Like, how can we make it more and more difficult for our characters and yet still have them find a way out? And it was so much fun doing, I mean, not to be mean, but like, it was really fun figuring out how could I make it so difficult for him and yet still have him find a way through. And then I had the idea that I wanted there to be some sort of conflict for him, because I feel like that is like an Act 1 problem, right? But then how could I ratchet it up? So I was like, okay, if they're going to lose their business and he contacts a civil rights attorney for help, what if she has a son that's openly gay? And then I was like, okay, but there's all this research I did about Abraham Lincoln and how he wasn't this, you know, he wasn't this perfect character. Like, there was this stuff I discovered about him being really racist and like wanting to ship black people back to Africa. And I was so shocked at that. And I was like, what if the civil rights attorney is African American and so is her son? And then there's an opportunity for me to bring this up. And then I was like, oh, the speech from Martin Luther King, maybe Wyatt's never seen it. And maybe Martin had to learn it because he's being homeschooled. And like, there was all this, right? Because his mother would totally make him do that. Like, she would totally make him memorize it. And then I was like, oh, and what if when they walk, what if they have that quote up in the bed and breakfast, but not the full quote? Not the part about what we have not yet achieved it. That's just the beginning part. Like, and then it all started to build. So that's how the plot kind of built for me. And then I just kept on thinking, what else can I do? What else can I do? I'm like, oh, he gets invited on a national TV show that he's never watched. So he has no idea that it's a completely conservative show. And he's completely dog whistled. And then I had to learn what a dog whistle was. So I just kept doing that. But the challenge for me wasn't so much plot, it was the characters. Because a plot can be fabulous, but if your characters aren't really the ones that are motivating the plot, you're in trouble. Right? Because otherwise it's sort of like, hello, I am the robot character you called from Central Casting, and I am here to fulfill your plot desires. And your book, no, they're going to put it down, right? Like, so you have to make sure that it's your character's actions that are getting you to make the plot happen. So for me, I actually had to, there are three main characters. There's Wyatt, of course, it's Wyatt's story. But then there's the girl, his best friend, that's the girl that becomes this sort of accidental girlfriend, Mackenzie. And I didn't really know who she was. So I actually wrote all of her scenes from her perspective. And then I took it back to Wyatt. And then there's sort of his nemesis in school, Jonathan. And I had to do the same thing for Jonathan. So I did a draft that was actually all 3 points of view, because I needed to know, who the hell are these people? Who is this bully? And why is he not just a cliche? Like, what makes him real? And that was really fun, and then pulling it back. So it's still Wyatt's story, and all this stuff that happens outside of the confines of these covers of the book happens, and it makes those characters feel real. And that's maybe the thing I'm proudest of about the book, because the plot came easy, but making those characters feel like they were real people that I knew and cared about, even when they were jerks and did horrible things to each other, that felt good.
I love that story about like writing from the 3 different perspectives, and then redoing it again, like just as part of an exercise, you know, think about that. That's, you know, a lot of times we'll do character studies, but actually writing it and then redoing it.
Yeah. I wrote every single scene that Mackenzie was in from Mackenzie's point of view, and every single scene that Jonathan was in from Jonathan's point of view. And actually, I even wrote extra scenes because I was like, wait, what happens there? And then I was like, yeah, that doesn't belong in the book. But I needed to know it. I needed to understand who he was, so would he be redeemed or not? Like, I needed to figure that out. So thanks.
That's fascinating. How do you see omissions in history, fiction like yours that references history, and historical nonfiction playing a part in YA?
It's all about omissions. Have you been to the American Writers Museum?
Yes.
Okay. So their children's room is beautiful. Paul Zielinski, somebody I know and am friendly with, he did a beautiful mural. They have 4 little activity stations. And it's 4 writers and 4 books. And one of the writers is Maurice Sendak. And one of the writers is Little Women, Louisa May Alcott. And one of the writers is Charlotte's Web.
Evie White.
Evie White, thanks. It's not meant to be a quiz, but like, I have conference brain. I'm trying to remember stuff. And then the other writer is James Baldwin. And it's so sweet and it's so beautiful, but there's absolutely nothing in those exhibits that says that James Baldwin and Maurice Sendak were gay. And that would be a nice thing to include. Just to say, he was a man who loved another man. Just that. It doesn't have to be, we're not, I think the word homo, this is, when I do a TED Talk someday, and I would love to do a TED Talk someday, I'm gonna open with this. The word homosexual is not particularly helpful because it makes people that are not queer think that the only thing that defines queer people is how we have sex. And if we were talking about love instead of sex, and if the word was homo-lovual, if we talked about homo-lovual history and homo-lovual rights, we would be having a very different cultural conversation, because the thing that holds me and my husband and our teenage daughter together, that binding element that makes us a family, is love. And that's the same binding element that keeps all of everybody else's family together. And I think that if we pressed on that, especially in our very sex-phobic culture, I think we'd get a lot further. So homo-lovual. I hope it catches on.
Oh, yeah, we have till 8:15 for everything.
Cool.
Okay. So you've talked about your process, this whole process of the Kickstarter and putting it out on the blog and all that as an experiment and learning, an opportunity to learn from process. So what advice do you have for other writers working to get their books to readers? Because that was your ultimate goal. Like, how do I get this to readers?
Right.
It's really...
So I will share from my perspective. I feel this sort of thrumming responsibility to get this message out there, because I know what a difference it would have made for me. And so I've created this container to get the message out there, right? Like, it's a cool book, it's a page turner, and it has this secret from history in it. And the tagline of the book is, what if you knew a secret from history that could change the world? And I like that a lot because it resonates for the dilemma the character faces, right? Wyatt faces this dilemma. He discovers a secret from history that could change the world, and what is he going to do about it? The reader faces that same dilemma. They hear about this story, they hear about Abraham and Joshua being in love, and they have to figure out, what are they going to do about it? The next time they see Lincoln Boulevard, or they see a statue of Lincoln, or they pull out a $5 bill, will they feel different about it? Will they feel different about themselves? Will they feel different about queer people? And then me, as an individual, when I felt like there was no other way to get it out in the world, I faced that same question. I know a secret from history that could change the world. What am I going to do about it? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to self-publish this thing. I'm going to author-publish this thing. And I feel like for years and years and years, I thought I wasn't breaking through because my craft wasn't good enough. So I invested time and effort and energy in my craft. I went to I did 8 full, complete revisions of this book. many like polished drafts, but like 8 full revisions. And that 8th draft, I went to a highlights foundation. I took a week vacation off of work. I don't get that much vacation. I took a week off, and I went, and M.T. Anderson, who'd won the National Book Award, he mentored me, and he did a full edit of my book. And then I worked with him for a week on asking questions, and it was incredible. And so I got to the point where I felt like, okay, it's not my craft. And then I was like, okay, but nobody's doing it. I'm being preemptively banned. So what am I going to do? And then it was like, okay, well, it wasn't that. It was like my agent was a criminal. Like, I couldn't give up, though, because it was so, I feel this responsibility. I still feel it. I'm very proud that this book is out, and I've gotten some amazing feedback from readers. That's beautiful and really touching, but I still hope this gets picked up by a traditional publisher, not because I'm like, because it will reach more people. I'm one person, and I can do all the events I want to do, and I can do as much as I can, but I'm one person with a full-time job and a family, and more books I want to write. So my goal is, like, I'm not going to get rich. Well, universe, hold on. I'll be fine if the book did fabulously well financially, but the real goal is for it to reach lots and lots and lots of hearts and minds, and change hearts and minds, and make people feel different. And I think that also for adults, like to resonate for their inner team, which is all a long way of saying, be true to the message that you have to share. Like, my big issue when I was a kid is that I never felt like I got heard, which I think has a lot to do with why I became a writer, because I had so much to say. I'm bursting with stuff to say. And I started my blog because no one was coming around and tapping me on the shoulder and saying, okay, Lee, we're ready for what you have to share. I don't think anybody's ever said that to me in my whole life, so I had to say it to myself. And then very slowly, I mean, I remember that first week of starting my blog, September of 2007, and I was like saying to my husband, 7 people came to my blog today. I was so excited, and only 2 of them I was related to. So. And then it built because I kept doing it. I blogged 5 days a week for 7 years, and now 3 days a week since then. I put in the time and I put in the work, but also I didn't listen to other people saying that we don't want to listen to what you want to say. I was like, my voice is important. And that was the hardest thing about losing the book deal, was that it made me feel like, okay, when I got the book deal, I thought, what I have to say has value because I have been chosen, I've been anointed by a Big 5 publisher, and they want to hear what I want to say, and they believe it has value. And that was a huge mistake. I think that was probably my biggest mistake on my journey, that I thought that I only had value, my voice only had value because someone else said it did. And when they said no, and nobody would take it, I was like, I just don't believe that that's true. And I'm like, I am gonna get this out in the world in some way. And I'm going to fulfill that vision of letting people know that they're not alone. Because if you know that we have a past as queer people, even if you're not queer, if you know that there's a past for queer people, you know that there's a place at the table today for queer people. And if you know that there's a place at the table today, you can envision a future. And it can be anything. It can be limitless. But you can't do that if you think that we started at Stonewall in 1969. So I feel like, okay, there's a quote. It's my favorite quote. It's Anne Lamott. And she says in her book, Bird by Bird, lighthouses don't run all over an island looking for boats to save. They just stand there and they shine. I love that. Part of it is what I love is that, look, I'm not going to convince everyone in the world that Abraham Lincoln was a gay, or he was in love with another guy, or he was bi, or whatever it was. But that's not my mission. My mission is to share my voice, is to empower queer teens today to feel like they can be, that they're not alone, that there's a history and there's a future for them, and to let everyone know that we need to be allies to each other and to celebrate the diversity of all of the wonderful diversity that we are. And my job is to shine. It's to be that lighthouse. And I would say that to you, that's your job too. Be a lighthouse. And the people that are interested, they're gonna come to the light. And I have to believe that. And if they're not interested, that's okay. Watch out, there's some rocks over there.
We should move to questions from the audience.
Of homo lovual.
Homo lovual. So we're talking about using dialogue to change kind of our perceptions and where our minds are, like, systemically. So talk about self-published and author-published. What's the difference there? Like we talk about in SCBWI, I'm pre-published.
Right.
I'm not unpublished. I am pre-published.
Yeah, because you're on a journey. You're on a road.
So talk about that difference.
Yeah, so saying self-published, it has that weird thing, like, oh, you did it all yourself. I'm sure it's wonderful. No, it's probably not. So saying author-published is sort of saying, I am a professional. I am publishing this professionally. And if you hold my book in one hand and you hold a book from a major 5 publisher in the other, you will not be able to tell which is which. And I think that's true of indie publishers too. I think for small and mid-sized indie, their books have to be indistinguishable. Because look, we're there with TV. Anybody ever seen Mad Men? Okay, so Mad Men was on this channel called AMC that, with no offense, nobody had ever watched anything on AMC except for old movies, right? But suddenly, there was this show that everybody was talking about, and it was amazing. And honestly, nobody cared at all that it was on this channel that they had never watched anything before except for old reruns of Casablanca. Like, it just didn't matter. The consumer does not care. If it's quality, I strongly feel that consumers do not care at all. No one's looking at the copyright page. Gatekeepers care. And what we need to get to is where, like, indie films have cachet, right? Like, oh, you want to go see an indie film? Like, yeah, bring it on. It's going to be better than that studio stuff, right? Like, we actually think that. But indie books, self-published books.
Always think that.
We didn't always think that. But as the quality rose and as it started to do better and they started to become more financially viable and the budgets got bigger and they did more amazing things and they started to win some awards, it eventually changed.
Well, and also the culture changed.
And
where people started thinking like there were little art houses.
Right, yeah.
And that became the fun thing to do. So yeah, so indie books, how do we make...
Right, and indie bookstores aren't really
in that
allies of indie books. And that's a challenge, even though they're natural allies, right? We're naturally aligned. And yet, it's very hard for indie bookstores to carry indie books because every inch of shelf space has to pay and help keep the lights on. So there's all these initiatives happening now trying to find where the connections are. How can bookstores with low risk carry indie books? And it still hasn't happened, but that's the vision, right? Like, to get the gatekeepers, the librarians, the bookstores, the trade publications to take it seriously, and not just see it as, you know, there are these service providers that their model is that they're not going to have a book. So the traditional publishing, the business model is we're going to have a few books that are going to be huge sellers, sell millions of copies, and then we're going to have a bunch of books that hopefully break even. And those big sellers are going to finance everything. The service providers that work with mostly self-published authors, their model's inverted. They're like, we're going to have millions of customers, and they're all going to sell 3 books each. Or under 300, actually. I think 300 is the average number of books a self-published book sells. And that is not a model that benefits anyone in terms of quality. It's a model that is just, it's a financial model, and it's a churn model, and it's not something that I think is awesome. Because what I want is I want there to be a lot of books that break even, because that's where diversity happens. I mean, diversity is happening not in the corporate space. Diversity is happening in the indie spaces. And sometimes you gotta take it into your own hands and be like, okay, I have this responsibility to get this out there. The only way the light in the lighthouse is going on if I turn it on myself. Yes?
I have kind of a weird question, but there's a new clause that's in some contracts with some publishers that say if you say anything from now until when your book comes out that you kind of fall out with the public, it's kind of open-ended. We have what I feel like maybe there's, or what would you do in that case if you had to come across a situation like that? Because I feel like it's going to be more common because of.
Yeah, I think I would say
it started with the Me Too thing.
Get an agent, and so you have some leverage, because I would not sign that contract.
But if it's like in all contracts in the future.
You know, I talked to a librarian. No, it's a good question. I talked to a librarian recently, and she was talking about how my book would do better in middle school libraries and high school libraries probably if it didn't have such a queer title or cover. I mean, I have the gay rainbow flag. I mean, the diversity rainbow flag on the back of my book. And you know, if I had a more neutral cover, if I had a more neutral title, I heard this from a few people. And I hear that, but then if every queer book in a library is closeted, there's no light on in that library. This is a light in a library. And yes, maybe there are kids that don't feel comfortable checking it out, so they'll steal it, which happens a lot. Or they'll reshelve it in the library while they're reading it elsewhere, which actually is a real story that librarians told me.
Oh, yeah.
Or they'll get the ebook or the audiobook and no one will know what they're listening to. I told my daughter about that story and I was like, yeah, I know, what should I call it if I would do that? And she's like, Poppy, you wouldn't do that. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, I wouldn't do it, because it totally is like closeting my book. I spent so many years pretending to be somebody else and so many years not having my voice heard. I will not allow myself to have my voice edited at all. I mean, not edited, I mean, of course, go ahead, edit. but like if somebody tries to gag, like put a gag on me, I had a situation where somebody was, they wanted me to do something and it would involve me not being able to talk. And I was like, no, I'm not signing it. Absolutely not.
So you were just mentioning like audiobooks and Kindle books, and now publishing. You kind of like have to have your books like everywhere. I mean, how's your book doing in some of these other publishing options?
So there's a paperback and there's a hardcover and there's an ebook in all formats, which is mobile for Kindle, EPUB, which is for everything else, and then a PDF, just so you know. I didn't. I'm learning all this. And then there's also an audiobook. And I'm really excited about the audiobook. The same narrator that did Simon versus the Homo Sapien Agenda did my audiobook.
It's on Audible.
It's on Audible,
And
yeah.
there's lots of good tidbits at the end.
Yeah, there's a secret like bonus. Well, I don't know if it's secret, but there's. Yeah. So Leslie Newman, who she wrote Heather Has Two Mommies, and she also wrote an incredibly gorgeous book about Matthew Shepard called October Morning, MOURNING, conference brain. So she interviewed me, and that was like, I had such a fanboy moment. I was like, oh my gosh, this author I so admire. We did this Skype interview. So that's at the end of the audiobook. So a little bonus thing. But I thought like the audiobook, so here's the great thing about being a publisher. You make the calls. I mean, you're paying for it, but like you get to make all the decisions. So I was like, hey, you know, the audiobooks I really love, I always have an author interview at the end. And I was like, I could do that. And I was like, who would I ask to do it? So that was really so exciting that she said yes. And then I was like such a fanboy. I was like, I know you probably haven't had time to read it, so here's a list of questions you might want to ask me. And she's like, Lee, I read it. I have my own questions. I don't read this. I was so excited. So yeah, and it's doing well, but I wanted to do better. I wanted to reach more people. And the audiobook actually came out. Audiobooks are hard and they take a long time, so the audiobook didn't come out till December. So yes and yes.
How did you go about deciding which direction to go with the company that would help you do the author publishing?
Yeah, the question was, how did I decide which service provider to use to kind of get the book printed and all that and distributed? Although I don't have full service distribution, there's no sales team, it's just wholesale fulfillment. I looked at a bunch and I needed to make a decision, and I chose one that had a sort of insurance plan against, because the thing with the book trade is that if a bookstore brings in a copy of your book and they don't sell it, they can return it. And the industry standard is about 30% returns are to be expected. But that is a huge financial risk. And I was very uncomfortable with that because I don't want to lose money on this venture. I mean, universe, it would be great to make money, but I really want to reach readers, and that's my main thing. So the company I went with, they had a thing where when they get returns, they don't charge you for it, they warehouse it. And then the next time it's printed on demand, ordered by print on demand, they pull it from the warehouse and they mail it. So that was really, for me, the big thing, because I wanted to understand and minimize my financial exposure, because I wanted to make it good. One second, this gentleman?
Yeah, because of your success in author publishing your book, well, I guess I'll take a step back. Were you turned off from traditional publishing after what happened to you? And I know that the reason why you talked about going back to traditional publishing for this book is to reach readers. But if you're able to reach readers without doing it, did that sour you from?
It soured me from that particular company, and my agent has strict rules that she's never allowed to submit to them again, because I don't want to put myself in that position. But no, I mean, I feel like there's been a lot of people that are like, I can't believe that happened to you. And I'm like, well, yeah, it happened to me. So I feel like if I can find a publisher that's going to be a champion and is going to stand up and is going to do the right thing, and they have a sales team and they're really going to get behind it with marketing, and they're going to help me reach tens of thousands of readers rather than thousands of readers, yeah, I'm on board. I mean, like, but not if they're like, well, you can't say what you want to say. Because I have a lighthouse. The light is on. And, if they want to come up and bring their ship over to the lighthouse, great, we'll talk. But it has to make sense. And again, like if I end up being a hybrid author where some books are author-published, self-published, and some books are traditionally published, then that'll be my journey. But I'm not going to not put stuff out in the world. I mean, the cool thing is we have this option now, right? And now I've done it, it's not quite as scary. But I still feel like, how can I maximize it? How can I reach the most readers? And also, it's a tremendous amount of time to publish. So if I can put some of that work on somebody else, even if they take part of the money, then I have more time to write the next thing. And then you have a question.
Yeah. Are you already connected with the Chicago Public School System with your book for the libraries?
I don't know, but we can be. I mean, the book is available for librarians on Overdrive and through Ingram Wholesale and through Baker & Taylor. So it's.
So they can purchase.
They
it.
can.
You just need
They can
connect.
Yeah. The challenge is that generally it needs a champion at a school. I mean, especially because it's so like queer.
So you need the perfect gay librarian at a predominant high school in Chicago.
Would that be you?
Are you volunteering?
My friend.
Excellent. We'll talk afterwards. That sounds wonderful. Yes.
Lee, do you have a different way of working with your current agent? Do you have different sort of criteria in mind about how you work together after the horrible experience?
Yeah, I do. She's very kind, and she's very appreciative of my experience, and so she's very responsive. We do regular check-in calls. I sort of independently verify that things are happening because I've been so burned, and she's cool with that. And I feel like there were 3 moments with that old agent that was the criminal that things didn't feel right. And I wondered. And I didn't push into it. And I didn't insist on an answer. And I didn't go to the other party. There's such a power differential in our industry, and you're like, oh, you have an agent, you shouldn't talk to the editor directly. But had I gone to one of those editors, I could have broken this thing open like 6 months earlier than it actually broke, because I talked with an editor and that she had said I had a book deal with, and I was like, I'm so excited that you're so interested in my book, and he looked at me like, I don't really, like, he didn't say it, I don't know what you're talking about, but he looked at me like I was crazy. But he's a guy that's a little socially awkward anyway, so I just thought, wow, that was a socially awkward moment. And then I spoke with the criminal agent, and I said, I had this really awkward moment. She's like, yeah, he's so awkward. So had I gone back and had I called him up, used my connections and been like, I need to talk to you, I would have figured it out. But I didn't, because I felt like, oh, well, I either trust my agent or I leave my agent. And I feel like that was a bad decision on my part. I should have been like, trust and verify.
Mm-hmm. But you and 59 other people.
Yes, it was 60, more than 60 people altogether. So it wasn't just me. And it was really hard, and it was 4 years of my career. But at the same time, I'm not going to spend any more time on it. I'm going to move forward.
Did she go to jail?
No, not that I know of.
Can we hear the name of the one for you?
Yes. So,
of the new agent?
The new agent's name is Marietta Zacher.
Yay for you.
And I just have to tell you one amazing story about Marietta. So on my blog, I did a series about diversity in publishing, and it was interviews with agents who were looking for diverse books and diverse creators of books, and I was really proud of it. And Marietta contacted me. I didn't know who she was, but she was like the second or third agent to contact me and say, I want in. So we did this interview, and the way I do interviews, because I'm kind of busy, is that I'll send a big list of questions, and then in an email, and they'll answer all the questions, and then as I read their answers, I comment. I write down comments as if I'm hearing it for the first time, because I am hearing it for the first time. And that makes it super conversational, which is my sort of secret for how my interviews always sound kind of like I'm having a conversation with you, because I kind of am. It's just, there's a time delay. Anyway, so in her interview, she said, if you have a story to tell and you do so from the heart, you will find your champions. And I was so moved by that. And I actually repeated it. And I was like, wow. And then I put it in quotes again. If you have a story to tell and you do so from the heart, you will find your champions. And I said, man, if I had that on a t-shirt, I would wear that. And then I went and I asked her the next question. So 2 weeks later, in the mail to my home, I get a package, and it's a t-shirt. And it's the quote. And on the back of it, she wrote my URL, at leewin.org. And this is while I had the criminal agent. And then, all these years later, more than 4 years later.
Oh, this was back?
That was back then, yeah. More than 4 years later, after all the thing blew up with the criminal agent, I had to find a new agent, and I contacted her, and we spoke, and she ended up being the agent that liked what I was doing and wanted to represent me. And so, in a funny way, it's like, wow, that was sort of meant to be.
That's awesome.
So, but what a road to get there.
You have a lot of kismets. The whole working for IBPA, so many things.
Yeah.